Hi friends, I'm Joy and this is Worldmaker Books. We're here today with chapters 2 and 3 of Black and White by Mark Wandrey. We pick up on Molokai in chapter 2 at the PCRI, Hawaii, Earth, August 10th, 2035. Did you hear me? Matthew looked up from the display and noticed his wife standing by the door to his office. He bit his lip and tried to remember. She'd been saying something. Terry? Yes, Matthew, our son. I know he's our son, Matthew said, making a face. Madison crossed her arms under her breasts and glared. Matthew's expression went away. That's the first step. Now you can tell me where he is? His game was over 2 hours ago. Matthew looked back toward his office window to see the sun falling toward the horizon. He looked back at the display, an alien-manufactured true 3D holographic display known as a Tri-V. It showed the anatomical makeup of a cetacean's brain, an orca to be precise. The images were like the Tri-V, thousands of times better than anything that had existed on Earth prior to the aliens' arrival. The image called him with its siren call. God damn it, Matthew Davis Clark! Oh, shit, he thought, and his head spun around. I think he went scuba diving. And I thought we were going to talk about whether he should be diving with that man. Terry wants to shave his head to look like him. I think we're safe. I checked on Doc with the Kaunakakai PD. What did they say? She walked over to stand next to him, her own attention drawn to the anatomical model. He's fine, he said. Vincent Doc Abercrombie has lived on Molokai his whole life, except when he was in the military. Military? Yeah, a Navy SEAL, apparently. He was injured on a dive and medically retired. The boat belonged to his brother, who was killed in a traffic accident while Doc was in the service. Oh, wow, she said, looking back at him. He nodded. Terrence is quite safe. He wants to be called Terry, you know. I know, he said, then shook his head. Don't understand why, though. Because he's an independent being, Matt. Matthew's head came around in annoyance. She was grinning ear to ear. Okay, fair enough. He touched a control and the Tri-V changed to show a device hovering next to the brain. He said he'd be back before dark. What about dinner? I admit I didn't think about that, he said. Well, I did. I saved him some. She put a covered plate on the desk. Saved you some, too. You're awesome, he said. The cover popped off the plate and the delightful smell of roasted fish and vegetables filled his nose. Ooh, yummy. He grabbed the fork and took a greedy bite. I forgot. Of course you did, she scolded. Again, her face didn't show any anger. She pulled a chair out and sat next to him. While he devoured the food, she slid the alien computer over to herself. The device was no bigger than a normal tablet computer, though it was anything but normal. Less than 5 millimeters thick and completely transparent, the aliens called it a slate. The Tri-V was projected from it, and it didn't move a millimeter as she slid it over. The slate instantly compensated, keeping the image frozen in space. Such amazing casual technology, she said, shaking her head. Casual, sure, he said between bites. That casual tech cost 200 credits. Madison whistled. $2 million for what the aliens consider a ubiquitous toy. Matthew shrugged. Translators are 150 credits each. He looked at the translator sitting on his desk. The Institute now possessed 3 of them, all on loan from the Logu Syndicate, the alien organization Koduku worked for, in exchange for engineering assistance developing aquatic life support systems. Looks like you have it worked out, Madison said, and pointed at the display. I think so, he said. The file we got from the Science Guild helped. The race known as Selroth have brains amazingly like cetaceans. I looked on the Aethernet and found these. He reached over and clicked the slate. The orca brain was replaced with a tiny technological device. Pop-up explanations of various components appeared. They're designed for the Selroth, but were apparently rejected for use. Rejected? She asked. Why? The customer didn't like the size. These are apparently large for a Selroth. He clicked again, and the device was rendered next to an orca. It was almost invisible. Obviously, it won't be a problem with our orca. He glanced at her. Probably not the bottlenose either. Then you're thinking about both. Why not? The question is, how much? They're listed as scrap, 50 of them for 15 credits each. 7.5 million, Matthew, she said, doing the math. Where are we going to get that kind of money? What would someone pay to talk to a dolphin? He asked. Matthew, she exclaimed, you're talking about an amusement park. That goes against everything we've worked for. She pointed back toward the tanks. All our cetaceans are rescues, for God's sake. You don't think I know that? He snapped. She shot him a sharp look, and he calmed himself. Look, don't think of it as a sideshow. Think of it as education. I'm not feeling it, she said. You don't think Joe Sixpack would leave here with a better understanding of why we should take care of the oceans after talking to someone who lives in them? You think Joe Sixpack will sit and be lectured by a fish? She said the last with a decidedly sloppy but recognizable southern accent to emphasize her scorn. No, of course not. We'd have to have some fun with it. I bet the dolphins will have a blast. It's a small price to pay to advance cetacean sciences 100 years in just months. Think of how much we can learn. I know as well as you, she said. If you recall, our PhDs are the same. Of course, he said. But still, how do we earn over $7 million without first having our talking dolphins or whales? I talked to the Bank of Hawaii, he said. They're willing to see a demonstration. We can't demonstrate anything without the machines first. Matthew reached into a drawer and removed a metallic box smaller than a pack of cigarettes. She gasped when she saw the alien writing on it. He pressed a release and it popped open, showing the exact device displayed on the Tri-V. Where'd you get that? She asked. I dug into our bank account, he admitted. Matthew, even one is $150,000. I got it half price as a sample, he swallowed. The $75,000 was almost the entirety of their savings, including Terrence's college fund. We've always been committed to the Institute, right? Of course, but our savings? It was the only way, he admitted. We can't go to NOAA or the trustees with this and risk losing control. She nodded slowly. The trustees were heavily risk-averse. When are we doing the surgery? She asked. As soon as I talk to one of the orcas. Who do we use? Who do you think we should use? Cray, she said. He nodded in agreement. That was his choice as well. Let's have a chat, he said, and picked up the translator. They rode together down the elevator to the tank holding the residents. All four of the resident breed were together in one of the two biggest tanks. As soon as Matthew and Madison came out the door, a huge, shiny black head popped out of the water, and an eye looked to see who was there. Matthew held the translator between them. A whistle and thrum came from the orca they recognized as Cray. Wardens, he said, using the word the orcas had chosen to refer to anyone who took care of them. Who these wardens? Matthew and Madison, he said, and they both knelt at the edge of the pool. Madison scooped some water into her hand and rubbed Cray under his mouth. The big male gave several deep clicks. Rub good, warden mates, Matthew Madison. He submerged for a second, and the other three surfaced a few feet away, clicking and whistling their own greetings. Not food time? Cray asked. The others tossed their heads in agreement. No, not meal time, Madison agreed. The orca's sense of time was extremely hit or miss. They knew night from day and could usually tell meal time. However, even mounting a clock in the tank room, big enough for them to see, hadn't produced any progress. It was part of the reason they wanted to do the implant. We wanted to ask you something. Ask? Cray said. Pod like ask things, like answer things, like wardens. We like you too, Matthew answered. You know the translator? He held up the device and Cray's big eye locked on it. Talk box, Cray said. Talk box, all the others echoed. Yes, Madison agreed. The orcas splashed water with their pectorals and shook their heads, happy to get it right. We want to put a talk box inside you, Matthew said, hoping they'd understand. How do? Cray asked. Eat talk box? Eat like fish? No, Madison said, shaking her head in an overemphasized motion so they could see it better. We would need to cut. Cut Cray? Make Cray gone? The translator conveyed alarm. Not gone, Matthew said quickly. It's called surgery. Ulibka, do you remember when we helped fix your tail? The female named Ulibka had come in with an injury to her fluke, which hadn't received proper medical attention in Russia. The result was a persistent wound that didn't want to heal. They'd put her under general anesthesia and debrided the wound, applying a waterproof bandage, and it had healed up just fine. Yes, yes, Ulibka said. Fixed tail good now. She dove and flipped over, her tail popping out of the water to flip back and forth. The notch was clearly visible, but the bandage was long gone. Like that, Madison said, but we'd have to put a talk box into your head. She reached out and touched Cray just behind his eye. Right here. Hurt, Cray? Cray asked. A little, afterward, Matthew admitted. Why? Cray asked. You'll be able to talk to everyone, Matthew explained. Not only wardens? Cray asked. Talk warden calf? Terry, our son? Madison wondered to her husband. Yeah, I think that's what he means, Matthew agreed. The translators were so expensive, Terry had never been allowed to use one or even hold it. Call it adult paranoia, but Matthew had forbidden it. Kids were kids, and the risk of losing or damaging a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment wasn't worth taking. Yes, you could talk to Terrence, our calf. Anyone else, too. Cray and the other three dove underwater and moved around each other. From experience, Matthew knew they were talking to each other. The orcas had adapted soon after understanding the humans could talk to them. It had caught all the scientists completely by surprise. Dr. Patel had suggested they record their conversations on the hydrophone and run it through the translator later, but both Matthew and Madison had vetoed it. They'd agreed the orcas deserved at least some basic dignity and some privacy. For the same reason, they were now asking the orcas if they wanted the translators installed. Cray and the others surfaced, and Cray again spoke. Why, you ask? We think we can learn a lot from you, Matthew said. No, why ask? Why not do? Do you mean, why didn't we do it without asking? Madison asked. Cray's head bobbed in an orca nod. Because you're a person and deserve to decide for yourself. We not wardens, Cray insisted, and they all nodded. No, Matthew agreed. We take care of you, but you have rights. Rights, Cray said, trying the word. What rights? It means you can say yes or no, Madison explained. Matthew pressed the mute button on the translator. A little oversimplified, he said. Madison shrugged. Close enough. He nodded, agreeing. I say no, or I say yes, Cray asked. I say no, you no do? Both Madison and Matthew nodded their heads. All four orcas floated for a long time. Several took breaths, their respiration blowing mist over the pool. They're thinking about it, Matthew realized. The orcas just kept surprising them. Can Pod all do talk box? Madison looked at Matthew, who looked back at her. Both of their eyes were wide with surprise. Do you all want them? She asked. Yes, Cray responded. We would need to have one for now, Matthew explained, hoping they would understand. Cray would be first. If everything's good with Cray, the rest of the pod then, later. Other pod then, also, he said, referring to the pod of 5 Pacific transient orcas in the next tank. If Cray's talk box works good, we'll also give them to the bottlenose dolphins. Little brothers get talk box? Ulibka spoke up. Little brothers was what the orcas called dolphins. The dolphins struggled more with the translators. Their language seemed to be more contextual, often speaking in metaphors. Ironically, the dolphins called the orcas dark killers. Yes, Matthew confirmed. Good, 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 the orcapod all agreed. There was no discrimination between the cetaceans the researchers had seen. Matthew was quite keen to see one day how well the device would work with other cetaceans. There were rough-toothed dolphins in captivity and beluga as well. The other scientists at the Institute had also talked to several other research establishments about trying to talk with a pod of blue whales to see if they could strike up a conversation. One more thing, Matthew said. Cray focused on him. There is risk. You could die, Madison said. Matthew looked at her, his eyes narrow. She stared him down, and he shrugged. It was true, there was risk. I not fear, Cray said without hesitation. I want talk box. Okay, Matthew said. Let's do it. Chapter 3, Kapukahehu Beach, Molokai, Hawaii, Earth, August 10th, 2035. Doc set the autopilot on his boat, the Crispin, and swung down from the flying bridge to greet the kids. He tousled Yui's hair and put Terry in a headlock. The young boy escaped with the nimbleness of a martial artist in a move Doc had taught him the previous month. Where we going? Yui asked, looking over the diving gear arrayed on the rear deck. Kapukahehu Beach, Doc said. The Dixie Maru? Terry asked, excited. Yep, Doc confirmed. You said we can't go down below 40 meters, Yui said. You can for a few minutes without decompression, he explained. However, we have a game changer. He picked up a strange clamshell-style case. Terry immediately became more interested. The aliens who'd been visiting the Institute over the last few months often carried cases just like it. They called them Union Standard equipment cases, though they came in a dizzying variety of designs. He tried to imagine some factory floating in space, cranking out these cases for whatever you wanted to store. Everything from crazy alien toothbrushes to laser blasters. "You got some alien stuff," Terry said. Doc looked at him with the appraising look he gave them sometimes when they surprised him. "Yeah," he said. "How do you know that?" Terry explained. "I had heard there were a lot of aliens coming and going at Kaunakakai lately. You guys in your fish research?" "Cetaceans, yep," Terry replied. "Fish," Yui said, poking Terry in the ribs with a particularly sharp elbow. "They're not fish," Terry said, and gave her a punch. Nope, and gave her a push. Anyone else might have gone right over the transom. Yui just caught herself and stuck her tongue out at him. "They're mammals, like us." "I wish I had fins," Yui said. "That would make diving even cooler." "Or be able to hold your breath for 10 minutes like dolphins," Doc said. 15 minutes for orcas, Terry said. He got the appraising look from Doc, while Yui's mouth became an O. Terry enjoyed knowing something Doc didn't. "So what's that?" "This," Doc said, and popped the case, "is badass." Inside were 4 metallic cylinders and several sets of plastic grids. "Looks like waffles," Yui said. Doc winked and took one of the cylinders out. Terry reached for another, and the man gently stopped him. "Hold up until I show you," he said. "Remember what I taught you?" "Learn, then do," Terry and Yui chorused. "Bingo," he said. Doc took the cylinder and closed the case, much to Terry's disappointment. Holding the cylinder in his lap, he opened a regular dive case and began removing equipment. Over the next few minutes, as Crispin motored along the Molokai coast, he used tools to attach other items. A rubber head strap, a wireless monitor, and a mouthpiece. "It's some kind of rebreather," Yui guessed, about a second before Terry was about to say the same thing. "Yes, it is," Doc said, and gave her a thumbs up. Terry scowled. Doc attached a standard dive mask and slipped the unit over his head. The silver cylinder was maybe 5 centimeters long and 1 centimeter thick. It wasn't much wider than the mouthpiece when Doc slipped it between his teeth. It looked kind of comical compared to the long rubber tubes linking a standard regulator to dive tanks. "That's it?" Terry asked. Doc removed the mouthpiece so he could talk. "For a low dive, yes," he said. "It's self-contained and has one of those crazy alien batteries, so you're good for 2 hours. "How big is the battery?" Terry asked. Doc took the equipment off his head and popped a compartment open with a twist. The battery was a centimeter long and half the diameter of the cylinder. He showed them the intakes, which brought in seawater and extracted oxygen to breathe. "Wow," Terry and Yui said. "It's like something from 60s James Bond," Doc said. Yui and Terry gave him an uncomprehending look, and Doc shook his head. "What about the plastic waffles?" Yui asked. "Ah, yes," Doc said, and grinned as he opened the case again. "Remember that 40-meter limit?" They both nodded as he took out the plastic pieces. These attach with a couple little hoses, and they're extended gas extractors. They can pull anything from the water you want them to. "I don't understand," Terry said. "They can suck nitrogen or helium from the water," Doc said. "Oh," Terry said, "so you can go deeper because you can add helium." "Bingo," Doc said. "How deep?" Yui asked. "As deep as you want," Doc said, and winked. "At least as long as the battery lasts. Oh, and you can hot swap batteries." Terry looked at the units and then at Doc, thinking about the dive breathers. "Where'd you get them?" "Friends in the service," he said. Terry knew Doc had been in the military, and that was where he'd learned to dive. It was also where he'd been hurt, though what the injury was he'd never explained. "Are we going to use them?" Doc checked his phone and glanced around the cabin to verify the boat's progress. "That's the plan," he said. "We're going to use them to dive down to the Dixie Maru." "We get to use them first time?" Yui said in disbelief. "No," Doc replied and laughed. "I've been using them for a month now. I love you guys, but do you really think I'd test alien stuff on a couple of 10-year-old kids?" Terry didn't answer because that would have been just fine with him. Doc briefed them on the basic operation of the apparatus. "I've already programmed them," he explained. "There are only a couple controls you need to worry about." As the boat neared their destination, Doc shepherded Yui into the cabin so she could change into her diving gear, and Terry changed out on deck. Doc was already wearing shorts and a vest. Yui came back out just as the boat throttled back and Doc's phone beeped. They'd arrived over the wreck of the Dixie Maru. Doc set a sea anchor and programmed the boat to hold position. Terry ran up the red flag with its white slash, a universal dive flag to warn passing boats that people were in the water. Doc set dive lines over the side, then helped the kids get their weight belts in place. Now, since we have the alien breathers, rate of rise isn't an issue. If something goes wrong, pull the release on your weight belts and come straight up. Always keep me in sight down there, and let's go slow on the descent. Got it? Yes, sir, Yui said. Yes, sir, Terry echoed. That was part of the deal. They were no nonsense while diving, and had been from the first time Doc took them snorkeling. Doc helped attach the plastic filters, which would allow them to go deeper. They were lightweight and attached to the back of their vests, where tanks would have been before. Once in place, Terry couldn't even feel it. Then it was time to get in the water, and both kids hesitated. What's wrong? Doc asked. It feels weird, Terry said. They were both standing on the diving platform, crisp and bobbing gently in the offshore swells, dunking their feet in and out of the water. Yeah, wrong without the tanks, Yui agreed. Maybe this is a bad idea, Doc said, rubbing his stubble-covered chin. No, I'm good, Terry said, and jumped in the water feet first. He quickly surfaced, put the breather in, and stuck his head back underwater. He breathed in and felt cool, delicious air. Other than a tiny lag between drawing in the breath and the pressure catching up, it was no different than a scuba regulator. Okay? Doc asked. Terry gave him a thumbs up. Not to be outdone, Yui jumped in, too. A few seconds later, she was using the breather as well. Doc nodded and slipped over the side, entering the water as smoothly as any dolphin Terry had ever seen. Doc gestured to the kids to take hold of the dive rope. Once he was sure they had a good grip, he pulled the release and grabbed it himself. The weight fell, and they went with it into the dark. As they descended slowly into the deep, Terry experienced a feeling of excitement mixed with fear, and he tried hard to control his breathing. Then he checked the monitor strapped to his wrist and saw the battery level at 99% and not changing. He'd become used to a tank with a fixed amount of oxygen. Doc preached constantly to carefully control your breathing to maximize dive time, and to give you a safety margin in order to escape problems. He relaxed and breathed normally. Every few meters, he forced himself to swallow, equalizing pressure in his inner ear. The earplugs he wore kept any pressure damage from getting through to his eardrums. His mask pressed ever harder against his face. He drew some of the pressure away by letting it out through his nose and exhaling. The surface light fell off to only a dim hint of illumination. It reminded Terry of being under a sheet with only his room's light on. Merely a hint of light without being able to see its point of origin. He'd never been down a fraction of the distance. It was amazing and spooky. The descent stopped suddenly, and Terry realized they were on the ocean floor. Bright light stabbed out, and he could see Yui in stark relief. Doc had turned his mask light on. Terry did the same, and Yui did so a second later. Their beams played around as they looked at the dark volcanic sand below them. Occasional plant life sprouted where there were rocky outcroppings, and a couple of light-dazzled fish swam past. Compared to the sea life he'd seen closer to the shore at shallower depths, it was almost dead where they were. As he played his light around, a shape came out of the darkness. It had to be the ship, but it only looked like a jumble of broken wood. He got Doc's attention by flashing his light at him, then pointed at the boards. Doc nodded. That was it. He'd told them about the Dixie Maru more than a year ago, shortly after they'd begun diving with him. He'd been down to it a few times before. He had the equipment to do it, but had absolutely refused to take the kids down. The boat, a fishing junk which had sunk in 1916, still had some stuff Doc called wreck trash. They poked around for a while, digging in the sand. Terry found an old spoon, which still showed a little engraving. Yui found an amber bottle with the decayed remnants of a cork in it. The water temperature was in the high 70s, and they were getting cold. Terry spotted Yui shivering. Doc must have seen it too, as he pointed toward the surface and made a thumbs-up motion. As per the rules, neither of them disagreed, and they repeated the gesture. He led them back to the dive rope, and they ascended into the light. It was only as they were ascending that Terry noticed he'd felt different at the bottom. He guessed it was the mixture of gases extracted by the breather now in his blood. Doc had taught him about nitrogen narcosis and the dangers of it. Breathing helium kept the nitrogen from building up and forming bubbles in their blood. Also known as the bends, it could be horrible. Doc had shown them pictures, and he kept seeing them in his mind all the way up. The display on his wrist said the breather was down to 77%. All the time they'd spent on the ocean floor, and the alien battery had gone down less than a quarter. Terry was amazed. They broke the surface, and sunlight hit their faces. He felt like he'd come up from a dream. That was amazing, Yui crowed after removing the breather. It sure was, Terry agreed. You kids feel okay? Doc asked, checking his own display. Yeah, great, Terry said. Yui nodded. Terry looked up and saw the sun was approaching the horizon. He needed to get home before too long. Besides, he was shivering now, too, despite the surface water being much warmer. He pulled himself up onto the diving platform and was soon followed by the others. Doc went into the trawler's cabin and came back with a couple of huge, fluffy towels. Getting all the water dried off quickly warmed them up. While they did that, Doc got the boat back underway. As they motored toward their starting point, Doc brought them hot chocolate, while Yui and Terry talked excitedly about the experience. Doc listened to them, smiling a little smile and enjoying their enthusiasm. Doc, Terry asked eventually, how do you dive deep? I mean, really deep. Well, Doc said, checking his phone for progress, when you go below about 300 meters, you use hard suits. You mean like the combat armor the mercs are making to fight aliens? Kind of like that, yeah, Doc said. He tapped at his phone and held up an image for Terry to see. The suit looked more like the cartoon monster at the end of Ghostbusters than a diving suit. The diver only had a tiny window to look out of. How deep can it go? Yui asked as she looked at the picture. Record is 410 meters, Doc said. Now, if you wanted to go really deep, you could go down further if you just stayed. You mean forever? Terry asked. Oh, you could come back up, Doc said, but it would take you weeks to decompress. Even with helium? Yep. Doc finished cleaning the breathers and put them back in the case. He glanced at them for a moment and nodded. The guys are going to like my report, he said as he locked it closed. The boat motored onward as Terry thought. He tried to imagine what it would be like to live deep down, deeper than even the cetaceans dived. No light at all reached past 200 meters. Perpetual night. What would it be like to spend your life down there? The sun fell behind Molokai as they continued on. The excitement remained, even when his bike's battery died halfway home. Okay, we're going to stop there. That's the end of Chapter 3. We hope you enjoyed your time with us this evening. If you did, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel, and we would appreciate it if you would share this video with friends that you think might like it. We're going to try to do this every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern with the same format. I'll record it and edit it, and then we'll play it at 8 p.m. so that we can be in the chat with you if you want to chit-chat or talk about the story or ask questions. And we'll be back again on Monday. See y'all then. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye. Hey, friends. Mark says hi.
Hi.
He'll try and be in the chat when he can. He's working tonight until 8:30, so I think he'll miss it tonight, but maybe next week.